Good morning, everyone, and welcome to episode 269 of the On Air Advocate. Where at the On Air Advocate, we look to provide education, support, and empowerment for all of those with different abilities, mental and medical illnesses, and their caregivers. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Tammy Flynn, and I am the host and producer of the On Air Advocate. And I am super excited if you are here this morning catching us live or whether you are joining us on the replay. Now, as always, if you think any of the content that we are talking about this morning could be relevant for anyone in your network or your circle, please hit the share button and share the love with others. Well, if you guys have been following us on social media, you know that we have made a turn in our focus for the end of April here, and we are focusing on National Stress Awareness Month. And oh my goodness, we all can relate with that. And so with that, I am so excited to welcome Jennifer Van Rossum. She is a psychotherapist and a mental wellness educator and consultant. And Jennifer, I'm sorry if I hammered your last name, so you can re-say it for us.
No, you actually did really well. Most people say Van Rossum, but it is Van Rossum.
Awesome. So you have not been here on the platform before. So I would love, before we dive into all of this stress management and learning more about it, for you to tell the audience a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I have a dual master's degree in counseling psychology and dance movement therapy. So dance movement therapy is an expressive arts therapy where we really understand the body-mind integration and use movement as a medium for communication and change. So a lot of the work that I do is embodied or somatic, but also in my therapy practice, it's talk therapy too. Since graduating, I have done several postmasters training. The one that I have really dove into more recently is interpersonal neurobiology. And so I have some extra training with them through their Mindsight Institute. And that's with Dr. Dan Siegel. And again, that is a real embodied approach, holistic approach to how we understand reality and the reality of our well-being. It takes into account many different disciplines. It's an interdisciplinary framework. So we draw from anthropology, sociology, neuroscience, psychology, chemistry even. It's absolutely fascinating.
And I know that when we chatted before the show and a few weeks ago, just really talking about like our body's response to stress and all of that, can you kind of walk us through that a little bit and explain?
Yeah. So as we were talking just a little bit before we started here, most people know what stress is. It's kind of our most common denominator. Stress is, our body's response to pressure, and it results in some kind of physical or emotional, mental distress. It's what triggers a feeling. And so then we have a stress response, and that's where we have then symptoms of our stress: anxiety, depression, additional tension in some sort of way. Our stress response is very important to understand because then it helps us to know how to cope with it. And it also gives us a sense of empowerment that we have some influence over how we respond to the stress, because the stress in itself oftentimes is out of our control.
Right.
So briefly, I'll just kind of explain like the Cliff Notes version of the Cliff Notes version of our nervous system response and then our brain response. So when we are in a stress response, our autonomic nervous system is activated, particularly our sympathetic nervous system, and that's where our fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. There's so many F's, right? Is activated. It's actually a survival response, and it's grounded in our evolution. Our ancestors had to be very hyper alert to know where there was threat and danger. We live in a modern society. We're not necessarily being chased by, tigers or having to hunt and gather per se, but we have this constant barrage of stimuli. Right. My phone is dinging, my kid's calling my name, I'm in traffic. There's just this, we're constantly being pushed into the sympathetic state. So even though the threat is not as severe as a life-threatening threat, Our body and our mind can't distinguish that. So it still has this really intense reaction. So that's what happens in our nervous system, okay? The sympathetic nervous system gets activated. If we just switch focus a little bit to our brain, have you ever seen this hand model of the brain? This flip your lid hand model? Okay.
Yeah.
So, and maybe some of your audience is familiar with it, but if this is a model of the brain, it sits in your head like this. This is our downstairs brain. This is our upstairs brain. This is our more primitive brain. We have our limbic system here, and under here, like right here, we would call this our limbic system, and in particular, our amygdala, which houses a lot of our emotion, memory, behavior. This is what gets activated when we feel stressed. Okay, so then we have this upstairs brain. So here we have the cortex and the prefrontal cortex right here. It kind of sits behind our eyebrows. This prefrontal cortex was developed later, and it helps to manage, control, and name what's happening in the downstairs brain. This is our executive functioner. This is where compassion, logic, decision-making lies. Well, when we feel stressed, when we have some sort of pressure, it activates this lower part of our brain, in particular this amygdala, and it fires so much that it can actually turn off or flip the upstairs brain and disengage. So now when we're in the stress response, we no longer are in touch with logic. We're no longer in touch with compassion. It's kind of like going into a room and turning off the lights. So now this downstairs brain has its way with us. We call this like the red zone. This is when you are likely to say something that you're later going to want to apologize for, not going to have the best judgment. You know, we hear that sort of phrase, oh my gosh, she's flipped her lid. That's what it feels like. That's what it looks like. Okay. As compared to when we have an integrated brain, that's when our executive functioner and our limbic system are talking to each other. Well, we call that the green zone. So when we are in this red zone, we have ways of coping that can actually re-engage our executive functioner to calm, soothe, and regulate. And that's kind of where we'll go then with some practices to do that.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? Kind of backing up to when you were chatting about some of those triggers that we don't even realize. I noticed that so much, especially now that we have cell phones. So growing up, obviously, we had pay phones, or in my my time.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I remember them.
Mm-hmm. And the phone just dinging. So I keep my phone on vibrate almost all the time, because just that sound of like ding, 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 something's there, something's with that urgency. It's anxiety. I mean, ridden, that it just brings this upon us. And I wonder how much all of those things in society now, and how things have advanced technology wise, that are always alerting us of things. I wonder how much more, percentage of stress that's bringing onto us than years ago when we didn't have those things.
Yeah, a significant amount, and it really affects our distractibility too. There's a landmark Harvard study that reported 47% of our waking hours are spent not present. 40%, 47% of the hours that we are awake and present, we're distracted. And so there really is, some neuroscientists call it a national attention deficit. We are in the midst of this modern culture that is streaming, pulsing, dinging, and it's having a significant effect on our well-being. The good news is that we have opportunities to find ways to engage what's called our parasympathetic nervous system. So if stress is activating our sympathetic nervous system, that red zone place, we have choice in activating the parasympathetic. And the parasympathetic is like the rest and digest. It's where our heart rate calms. We have a feeling of tranquility. There's, an equilibrium and harmony. That's the green zone, the integrated brain.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And so different ways that we can strengthen this, we can deal with these things and manage them better. I definitely recognized or related, I should say, with you when you said, when we flip our lid, there are ways to bring it back down. I was thinking to myself, you know what? I usually call my sister because she's usually very level headed. And she's like, did you think this through? Did you
Yeah.
think about it? And she
Yeah.
brings a lot of times that calm to me. Is it really that big of a deal right now? And, that voice of reason when we don't have reason.
Yeah. And what I love about that is that you kind of instinctually know who to reach out to.
Mhm. Yeah.
This is someone who has some logic, who usually kind of helps to ground me.
Yeah.
And that is this kind of instinctual, natural inclination, which again is a fascinating part of how our body and our mind work under stress.
Yes. Yes. So what do you feel are your top five for,
Yeah.
strengthen this strategies, those kinds of things?
Yeah. Okay. Well, first, let me just kind of describe how I've come up with this. So
Perfect.
we are so very fortunate here in Wisconsin to have Dr. Richard Davidson at the University of Madison. He is the founder of the Center for Healthy Minds, and this is another organization that I've done some training with. So Dr. Davidson and his decades of research with colleagues has discovered that there's 4 key areas of well-being, and that would be awareness, insight, connection, and purpose. So we function at our optimal level when we are present, curious, connected, and live out our values and have a meaningful life. And so something that's also recently come out, they've just published a paper on it, that they propose that in order to enhance well-being, we need to look at it from what's called a training-based framework. And that's where we use mind training with meditation, mindfulness, but it's sort of like the foundation towards working with awareness, insight, connection, and purpose, or not even working with, but embodying, really. And so from those 4 key areas, and now let me say that many other scientists have different, different pillars.
Right.
Dr. Dan Siegel has, I should have written them down. But it involves the same things. And over at the UPenn, they have, very similar variables. But I really enjoy what Dr. Richardson, how he's laid it out. So from those, I've come up with these 5 life areas that we can focus attention and sort of use it as a well-being inventory. Because when we are focusing on our well-being, we are put in a place of intention and awareness with our stress response. Okay, so instead of we call it our sense of agency. Are you the hammer or the nail? Instead of going through life feeling like life is just happening to me, where I am the nail, we can be the hammer. How do I influence? How do I make life happen for myself? So these 5 areas are, I'll name them first and then describe them.
Okay.
The first is learn. The second is be. Third is move. Fourth is connect. And then the 5th is nourish. So starting with learn, when we invite curiosity and openness into our perspective, into how we approach the world, we are put in a place of natural integration and natural health. It is when we sort of close down and narrow that we lose focus, that we lose a sense of reality. So learning is about being open and receptive to what life has to offer. This is where I encourage clients to pause often.
Yes.
And to be in a state of awe. We call this also the beginner's mind, to see things as though you've never seen them before. There's also some really fascinating research done with awe and its effect on our well-being. But it's the pausing part that's also really important. When we're curious, we're also less judgmental. And so then we're less critical. Our stress response thrives on, the monkey mind that goes from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. And we continue to assess it and criticize it and judge it. So offering some curiosity is really helpful. Learning also involves, learning a new skill, a new craft. Keeping yourself engaged and interested is really important for our well-being. What we're doing right now, listen to the podcast, read the book, expand your exposure. And then there's also learning that happens between, people. Be open to receiving what others have to say. It's one of those components that I very much stress in what I do in my clinical work, and then also my educational work. There is something about being in a place of, I don't know, that's really empowering and profound.
Yes, definitely. And that learning part of it, and taking in and getting different perspectives on things.
Yeah. So then the next one is B. And B is, however you do it, pause again long enough to let your nervous system rest. So this kind of piggybacks what we were talking about, this constant barrage of red zone, sympathetic, be aware of this, I'm late for that. Oh, what about that? It's very, very important to create the space and the opportunity to be present. We can do this simply with taking a breath. It's kind of cliche, but it works. It works on a really beautiful neurobiological level. There's all sorts of different breathing exercises and practices that are really helpful. I teach those in a lot of the classes that I offer. It's really helpful here to give yourself permission to start over. So this perspective of beginning again can also be very intrinsically rewarding and also affirming. We have to remember that rest. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Saying that each day is a fresh start,
Each day and each moment. So in mindfulness or mindful meditation, one of our basic tenets is this invitation to begin again. In every moment, your thought wanders. I catch it, I bring it back, I begin again. And that's where it's this attentional training, this mind training that helps to integrate our brain so that it can function at its optimal level. Being present, doing one thing at a time. I think that's also really hard for us. Our human species has adapted to be multitaskers, but that's not how we function in health and wellness. So pausing, if I'm folding the laundry, I'm just folding the laundry. If I'm reading the book, I'm just reading the book. That is a discipline.
Yes, and I think this platform serves a ton that are in the caregiver space. Chronic illnesses and whatnot. And I think that is something we've all adapted ourselves to so much, like we multitask. That's our normal. Is to be multitasking. But in doing that, you're right, your mind is always racing. You're always going, thinking of the next thing instead of being present within the moment of what you're actually working on.
Yeah, and that increases our propensity to feel anxious as well. And anxiety, again, is another one of those symptoms of stress that has become incredibly problematic for us. Yeah. So there's a lot of good reasons to pause, give yourself a breath. SelfCare, make a list of SelfCare ideas, but use them. We say knowledge is power, but I like to say knowledge is potential power. It really doesn't have an effect until we use it. And so we're really good at thinking about all the ways to make a difference. And so there's a real encouragement to put effort and intention into what you're actually thinking about. There are a lot of different mindfulness apps that I would encourage someone to invest some time into learning about. Mindfulness really is this underbelly to well-being that we're finding through a lot of, a lot of decades of research now. And we hope that someday it will become like brushing your teeth, a mindfulness practice. It's a sort of mental hygiene. And, some people make this joke of, in the 60s, if you were running, somebody would ask you, who's chasing you? Right? Before we had the introduction of exercise and, physical health. Mindfulness is kind of taking that trend. Someday there'll be a time where it's commonplace. That's what we hope, because it is so crucial and critical for our well-being. And what we teach in mindfulness is how to cultivate equanimity. And equanimity is this ability to see what's happening and not be carried away by what's happening. And that is completely linked to our stress response. Can we observe it? Can we notice it without reacting to it?
Right. Within it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then we have this increase in, our concentration power. That's one of our biggest kickbacks that we get from a mindfulness practice. So a lot of encouragement here to consider a contemplative practice or reflective practice, because it will make a difference.
Yes, and some of those apps that you were talking about, I do know that there is quite a few of them out on the market now. Maybe when we're done with the show, you can go back through and in the Facebook feed and the comments and stuff, maybe drop one or two of your favorites, that kind of start their journey of checking out some different apps and stuff that they possibly can use for that.
Yeah. I'd be happy to do that.
And I think sitting within that space, I know we talk a lot of times about self-care. But really recognizing that self-care is sometimes you figuring out what calms you. And it's not always the general things that are on that list, like read a book, sit and breathe, do this. So, finding what works for you is so important. But I'm sure that kind of goes back to figuring out what de-escalates that when you're brain open.
Yes, certainly. And I'm so happy that you brought that up. And that's where I hope with these different areas of life, people are able to take a broad perspective and see, if it's not just that area, like if I don't have an affinity with being, right? Maybe it's how I nourish, maybe it's movement, maybe it's, connecting with others. So this really is hoping, I hope to broaden the lens for others to be creative in how they attend to their own well-being.
Yes. Okay, so we have, we have learn, right? That was number one.
Mm-hmm.
And 2
is be.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then next is move.
Move.
So we very often forget that we have a body below our head. We live in a very heady society. And so move, I use that word because it connects us to our body. When we think of movement, we think of body. And so, reflect on how am I with that? Where am I with that? Ideas would be to, sit less and move more. We know just from having a sedentary lifestyle. So this isn't necessarily talking about exercise and being more active. It can be that, but sometimes we just need the encouragement to just get up, and that makes a difference. Embedded in this is a real emphasis on getting to be in tune with your body. And the body can be a scary place to go. I work a lot with trauma. I work a lot with eating disorders. It can be a very tender subject, but it also is this place of wisdom and regulation and healing. And so sometimes we need the encouragement and the support, the okay, that it's okay to go there. It might not be as scary as you think. Mm-hmm. Getting in tune with the body kind of touches on that embodied or somatic piece of my work too, in that these systems are all related. Even our brain, we call it an embodied brain because it is integrated into all systems of the body, and then all systems of the body affect the brain. And so when we ignore it, avoid it, we are not getting a holistic approach to our health. Suggestions too, to just take breaks in your day to stretch, to move. Certainly exercise is important, but making movement a priority in general. And one of the ways that I do this in some of the classes I teach is through integrative movement or mindful movement. And that's just varying techniques and practices to tune into the sensations of the body. So very often we think about the body, but we don't know the body. We don't know how it feels to be in the body. And it's a really precious practice. I do a lot of hand on heart exercises or practices where we're connecting to like our polyvagal system. And that's the work of Stephen Porges. Your listeners can read up on him and all of that. But there's a real science behind why movement is so important.
Yes. And I always say, I think that especially for those that are caring for others or those that are going through traumatic situations, our brains by the end of the day feel like we've run 100 miles. And so if you don't remind yourself to get up and move, or put a pedometer on so you know how far you walked, you don't really know how little you actually move. And those are frequent flyers who do the hospital hustle all the time. What are we doing in doctors' offices? We're sitting. So I do something different. I stand, I walk around, because or else you'd spend most of your day sitting. So I try to put a timer on, and every hour I make sure that I'm up at least 25 minutes of that hour, moving or working or changing your workstation, to a standing position, just because we don't, I think we feel like, oh, it was an exhausting day, but really what was exhausted is our brains from all the things that were happening, exhausted our limbs, and that's against your digestion, and that's a whole nother topic, but that works
right,
fertility, kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's awesome. Those are wonderful adaptations that you've created in your life to make movement a priority. And I would encourage then someone, as they're doing that, to then tap into that curiosity, and really wonder, like, okay, how does my body feel different? What is the sensation that I experience? So again, it's growing this awareness and insight.
Yes. So everyone needs to get up and move when we're done with this.
Yeah, move and acknowledge the sensory system that you're in. This is a body that we were born into. It's a resource.
Yes, most definitely.
Next, we have connect. And connect is an encouragement to reach out. We are designed to live in community. We are designed to need each other. There's a healthy dependency that we need to engage in. Embedded into connect too is kindness and compassion. The practice of that's a skill. I encourage others to listen, to understand, before they are giving advice. So be an active listener helps you to connect, make eye contact, put the phone down. Again, that distractibility, can you lessen the distraction? It then deepens our connection with one another. I also include nature into this, plants, pets. Sometimes because of our history, connecting with another human is tricky or painful. And so start with nature, and kind of eventually work up to engaging with others. Connection is also really important when we talk about integration and our stress response. So when I say integration, we have a me, right? This is me, the body that I was born into, the sense of self that I have. And then we have we, this extension of people around us, who we connect with. When we add me plus we get what Dr. Daniel Siegel calls we. And it's this integration of two separate wholes linking together harmoniously into one. And so it's kind of coming back to the importance of learning about yourself, being with yourself, understanding like who you are in your body. That's your integration process, becoming a whole separate self. and then being able to see others as whole separate selves. And then we link together in, this really sweet name of Mui. I love that.
Mhm.
When it comes to a stress response, Dr. Kelly McGonigal, she has written The Upside of Stress, The Joy of Movement. She's a brilliant scientist. She also has a great TED Talk out there, but she has really made it her life's mission to help shift our perspective on stress as not viewing stress as all bad. So we know, like we talked earlier, the stress response part of it's survival and it's helpful. It's good. But in general, we tend to experience stress as bad. And from some significant studies that she references, we know that when you experience, so if we have person A and person B, they experience the exact same stress. Person A views that stress as harmful. Person B views that stress as helpful. Person B, experiencing the exact same stress but having a different perspective on their stress, tends to live, on average, I believe it's 7 years longer than the person who experiences that stress as harmful. So simply shifting how we view stress. And when we think about stress being helpful, it's recognizing that our body is having a response that's preparing us for a challenge. And when we feel prepared for a challenge, we tap into resilience. It's a really fascinating, discovery that she's made. Not just she has made, but that she advocates. And there's a lot of foundation to then resilience. And then when it comes to connection, when we feel stressed, you mentioned this earlier, you reached out to your sister, right? Was it your sister? Yeah.
Yes.
So we have a mechanism built into our stress response that connects us. When we feel stress, there's this, it has to do with all of these, different stress hormones like oxytocin, but these kind of stress hormones that promote pro-social behavior or connection are activated. And so we reach out. So there's a quote by Dr. McGonigal, and she says, when we view stress as helpful, you create the biology of courage because there's vulnerability in reaching out. And when you choose to connect with others under stress, you create resilience. So connection is a really big piece of our stress response. Being vulnerable enough to reach out, which is your courage, and then tapping into that, biological force of connection, which then increases our resilience.
All of this. So good. And that is number 4, correct?
That is,
we're on
yep,
4.
That's number 4. So then number 5 is nourish. And this is kind of what it says. Feed yourself real food, real good whole food. So again, because we, acknowledge this embodied brain that's integrated into all of our systems, our digestive system is also part of that integration process. So an encouragement to choose health over convenience, which again, when we're in a hurried, fast-paced way of living, that can be, fall down the ladder. So this is where, again, we're pausing and being comes into play. Hydrate with water, not coffee. Coffee doesn't count. And then you can bring mindfulness into how you eat too, to eat mindfully, slowly, taste your food. Certainly all of these, parts of our life and our being are related to our immunity too. And so nourishing yourself. Many of us have had, health and immunity, physical health on our minds, especially with the pandemic. So this is one area that you can have a real significant influence over too.
Yes. And not just for overall health, but, so many do experience different digestive issues and whatnot. And I know that stress and then not eating well sometimes can inflame, some of those conditions as well, which is kind of a double whammy. So clean eating.
Yeah. So then lastly, how we can use this as an inventory. If you take each of those 5 areas and you rate them on a scale of 1 to 5. Okay, so 1 being I'm really struggling with this, 5 being I'm rocking it. And you reflect on your week. So this can be a reflective practice. So encouraging that sort of contemplation, that insight awareness. Reflect back on your week and just rate each one. Okay, where did you fall on that? And then based on your reflection, set an intention for the coming week. What area of life deserves more attention? You know, where can you be more intentional? And perhaps just a small, simple step to raise that rating. And it's very important to have perspective here. So if you are like a 1 or a 2, let's say I'm looking back on my week and I look at, connection, right? And, I was supposed to call my mom and I didn't. And then I canceled my, dinner date with my friends because I had to take my kids somewhere else. I didn't really feel connected with my husband and we were just ships passing in the wind, right? I'm at like a 2, I'll say. When you're at like a 1 or 2, that's a place to offer yourself self-compassion, not criticism. So that's when we take into consideration all of the stressors. So the stressors being the triggers of stress, causes, conditions, the circumstances, and say, oh man, you know what? Like I had this extra project to do. I was feeling kind of depressed this week. Yeah, it makes sense that I was at a 1 or 2. I don't need to beat myself up for that. I can intentionally and compassionately, with some gentle curiosity, choose something simple that'll help me in the coming week. And then if you are on the 4 or 5 part of the scale, movement, like I went to the yoga class, I did my morning integration, my mindful integration. I went hiking with a girlfriend, right? Like I feel like I'm rocking this movement part. Then that's a time to acknowledge your accomplishment, which again is another form of self-compassion. Self-compassion can be an antidote or kind of a balm to this stress response. So the self-compassion of, yeah, like I'm going to pat myself on the back. I'm proud of myself for doing that. So that it provides just a very simple, cohesive, relatable method to kind of track and measure your well-being. And by doing that, you simultaneously are more in tune with, intentional with your stress response, how you're responding to stress.
Yes. So today we all need to take some inventory. I love it. You've given us a project to work on for today. And what I would love, Jennifer, is that we have quite a few comments and stuff on Facebook and questions and whatnot. We don't answer them during the podcast, but if you can go back afterwards and just kind of answer those. And then I would love if you would put down the different steps and a little bit of the strategy within the comments. So if someone is catching this and they're able to kind of jump right in and go through some of those as well. So some of that information. But before we log off for the day, I want to find out, where can people connect with you? So if they want to directly chat a little bit more, if they want to get involved, if you're doing a webinar series or any events that you're going to be a part of, where can they find all of that out?
Sure. So right now I'm working on a website. In my, couple decades of work, I've never really needed a website, but with the pandemic and the push to the virtual world, I'm getting on it. I'm doing it. So that should be up soon. So I can certainly let you know when that's up. It will be 5peakslife.com, the numeral 5. So right now I can be reached via Instagram, and that's at 5peakslife, 5 being a numeral. And then you can also reach out to me via email, and that's at Jen Van Rossum at 5peakslife.com. My name, I'm sure, is written somewhere, so they can see how that's spelled. When you go to my Instagram page, there's a link in my bio to sign up for a newsletter. I do a monthly newsletter, and that's where I highlight mental health, mental wellness resources, suggestions, and I also notify the community about the classes and events that I offer. So I'm currently offering a mindful meditation group. It's actually where I'm off to after this. And then I'll, post on there what's coming up next.
Wonderful. So when we log off as well, I'm going to have you hop on over and we'll just drop in the comments your email and that handle for Instagram so that people can easily access it as well. So Jennifer, I thank you so much for being here at the On Air Advocate this morning and giving us so many things to think about as we all look for ways to manage our stress in the best way possible, especially during this Stress Awareness Month. And next month, we bridge right from April into May, which is Mental Health Awareness and Anxiety Awareness Month. So definitely lots of things to think about in education to take in during the next 2 months here. So thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
And if you guys want to know any more about the On Air Advocate and the services we offer, you can head on over to onairadvocate.com and you can find all of them there. With that, I hope you all have a wonderful, it's Wednesday, and I will see you guys soon. Thanks so much again, Jennifer. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.